Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Campfire Podcast. Our host
Chris.
and our guest, my friend JP. Introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Elijah Parker, but my friends call me JP. I study psychology here at the Howard University.
Okay. Love that. So, tell us a little bit about why you decided to major in psychology.
I've always wanted to be a therapist. I definitely enjoy helping people and learning how to understand each other.
Okay. Okay. Um. Oh, you want to go?
No, I was just saying I agree with that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is there a specific circle or focus of psychology that you find like the most interesting, or you kind of just like psychology as like a field in general?
I would say I definitely like psychology as a field in general. However, I definitely do enjoy like interconnected relationships. So like
Mm,
relationship psychology, friendship psychology, social psychology, anything that kind of involves the community as a collective.
Too.
okay, interesting. Um, so me and JP have been friends for actually not that long. Actually, we've known each other for what, 3 months? 3 months?
Um, I don't know.
I don't know
I
either.
don't
I
recall.
would say roughly 3 months because it's been since the end of October. No,
Was it
November?
before homecoming or after homecoming?
Had to be after.
So
Had to
yeah,
be
That's
after
about three
because I
months.
probably would have heard about you guys going to homecoming.
three, three maybe going on four.
Yeah, probably because getting to February. But over the time I've known JP, one of the first things that he actually made me, along with the other people that met him on that fateful day, did was that he made us take a attachment styles test. Now, at this point, we've all taken the test. JP a lot of times, me twice, Christian.
I've taken this a couple times.
He's also taken it a couple times, and so we all got our attachment styles. And so I kind of wanted to have JP lead a little discussion about, I guess, our different attachment styles.
Oh, now,
Yeah, do your thing. Go on,
um,
psychology, man. Do your thing.
What was yours?
so there's four attachment styles. One being secure, which our friend here, Julian, secure attachment style. Secure attachment styles are said to be like comfortable with communication and communicating about feelings, and usually comfortable being independent or comfortable being, with someone else and connected with them. So a lot of times people say secure is where we ideally want to be, especially when dealing with other people and relationships, because it tends to be less problems because they're adaptable and able to both be independent and both exist in a community. Then you have anxious, preoccupied. These tend to be the people who need a lot of validation, who needs a lot of reassurance. These people oftentimes are clingy. You might find them like always asking you, "Are we good? Are we okay?" They're always questioning the relationship and what they could do better. And a lot of times, these people show up as people pleasers. They tend to will do anything for you just because they're afraid of losing you. Then you have fearful avoidant, which I am a fearful avoidant. This is often named as the disorganized attachment style. And the reason being is because they go back between being anxious and being avoidant. So while on one hand, they crave love and desire it and crave that intimacy and desire it, they oftentimes find themselves also fearing it. They fear that love, they fear that intimacy. And these tends to be because they've been hurt in the past, or they're afraid that they get too close to someone, they're gonna lose them, or something's gonna happen. So they kind of switch between these two moods, which is why they're called disorganized. Because not only are they extremely anxious, but they're extremely avoidant. These people oftentimes will also be the people who will like cut people off, um, just on the whim or because they feel like something happened, and sometimes can be a little dramatic, I will say. And then you have dismissive avoidant. So these are the
I
people who are very independent. Oh yeah, yeah, dismissive avoidant. These people are tend to be very independent and oftentimes are uncomfortable with emotional discourse or emotional conversation. Things that involve intimacy, they tend to shy away from and be avoidant of. And so a lot of times they having conversation with them about emotions can be rather difficult, especially with an anxious and dismissive attachment style, uh, interacting rather friends or in a relationship. um, they don't often see the point of being anxious or worrying because they're very avoidant and, like I said, very independent to that ability. So when it comes to communicating about things that involve emotions or involves things like this, they tend to shy away from. So of those, those are the four attachment styles.
Okay, okay. Um, well, how do you feel about well, okay, so since you have a lot of people take this test, right? So you know a lot of different people you interact with attachment styles. How does knowing this inform your interactions with them or how you like build relationships with those people or choose not to build relationships with those people?
I think it was very helpful when I first started doing it and understanding the attachment styles as they were. Um, what I found was because I'm a fearful avoidant attachment style, I can't really exist with someone who is also very avoidant. A lot of times, the people that I clash the most with are those who are either anxious, preoccupied, or dismissive avoidant. And so, anxious, preoccupied only activates my anxious, so they activate my fearful. And so when that happens, I become avoidant to them, and then those relationships to end because they need more reassurance, and because I'm in my avoidance stage, I can't give it to them. Um, and it also can be aggravating or irritating. And a lot of times, anxious people are misunderstood because they need more validation, and sometimes I'm just not really able to give it. So some of those relationships that they tend to struggle with me, but however, because I try to understand in person, I'm able to maintain those type of relationships. But they are a lot of pressure. And for the dismissive avoidance, those relationships tend to always end badly. You know, they start off good because dismissive avoidance can be independent. And, you know, sometimes they can be social, they can be, you know, good friends or whatever. But because I know that I'm a very practical person, especially when it comes to my emotions, I'm going to communicate it when I feel upset about something. And dismissive avoidance tend to not ever want to have that conversation. They tend to be very avoidant when it comes to emotional discourse or confrontation in general. And so then that becomes a problem. So deciding rather to have these types of friends can be very hard. Personally, when it comes to dismissive avoidance, I try to avoid them because I know that we just can't communicate accurately. And unlike the other attachment styles who can come to a common ground of understanding, being a secure who can be adaptable, being anxious who can understand why I may be afraid or anxious as well. But when it comes to dismissive avoidance, they don't understand any of those things. So the communication lacks, and therefore they tend to not go very well. So.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. Christian, as a dismissive avoidant, as you're taking this information, hey, how do you feel about this stuff?
Um, I've definitely dealt with the things you were just talking about. Um, for me personally, it's not that I try not to, I guess, associate with that attachment style. It's more like, for myself, I feel like once I start to identify with like a certain thing, I'll start to like act, almost like act like that certain thing because I identify with it. So
Mm-hmm.
I do have some of those problems that like a dismissive avoidant attachment style like has. 'Cause I closely identify with that. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, I try not to I guess like box myself into that because some of those traits like I generally don't want to live like that. So I try to do I guess what's more like secure or like what's I guess the more confident attachment style, the more secure attachment style. It's definitely like harder because I have like myself, I have my like internal, I guess what's the word? I guess I have like natural urges to act more dismissive. So then I have to like recognize that and not act like that. Like act more secure, which is difficult a lot of ways. And sometimes like I do kind of slip and I go back to those like old habits, but I try to just kind of build like a new kind of version of me that I would want to like basically.
Hmm, it's actually pretty good.
What about you? How do you feel as a secure one?
Honestly, well, for one, I mean, I semi recently took this test, so I didn't even really know about this until relatively recently, and so it's more like a retrospective way I look at it, and so I'm like, huh, I could see how I developed this because I feel like initially I probably wasn't this. I wasn't secure. I probably was. I don't even know what I would think I was. Like maybe, what is it again? Anxious.
Anxious, preoccupied.
Yeah, maybe. Or like maybe a combination of two. Maybe like a dismissive avoidant and anxious preoccupied. I feel like during my first relationships, I was like I was like stressed, but I guess I think it's a little controversial because my start of my dating was with the practice girlfriends, um, patent pending. No, that is
Patent
not
pending
toxic. I
is
swear.
insane.
They still have to this day. They still have no idea who they are. Well, they don't know, but well, JP.
They
Well,
they
obviously
know
you wouldn't even know
now.
who those
I
people are.
definitely
But
know.
I mean, they definitely won't because they're not gonna watch this video. But he definitely knows who these people are, but they don't know, and that's how it should be. But when I first started dating, that's how I started. So because of that, like my first relationship was me figuring out how to not be problematic in a relationship and how to like maintain a long form relationship where both parties are satisfied, how to interact with a girl, how to talk, how to not sound like I'm insane. Also, how not to say crazy stuff. I realize I have a problem. I like on the podcast, it's fun. Or like in conversation with friends, it's fun. Say something a little unhinged, here and there, have a little
Here
fun.
and there.
But I realize I have a little bit of lack of self control where sometimes when I'm talking to women that I'm interested in, and I'll kind of slip into like my most natural state where I start saying stuff, and like I'll look back at it and I'll be like, why would I ever say that? Because I'm pretty, I would say I'm fairly intelligent. I have like a pretty good grasp on interactions with people. So I know when someone's saying stuff or doing things that like will unsettle the other person. So like when I say those things, I'm like, wow, I have a problem. So that was like that early stuff. But when I got my first proper girlfriend, which was well, toxic. When I got in that first relationship, I definitely could see myself as like anxious and getting nervous when we like didn't talk all the time. Um, and being like just generally like really needy and wanting to like have their attention, but then also like going along with whatever they said and then becoming like I guess this is part where it kind of becomes avoidant, where I'm like, if they're like, "Oh, I need some space," like I'd go super hard in the space, and then I'd return back immediately and be like, "Oh yeah, let's go back totally to normal," as if we didn't just take like a break for like a week where we didn't talk whatsoever. Um, but after finishing that, I went a little bit of a character arc, and so now I guess this is where I got to here where I'm like more secure. I'm kind of like, oh, I experienced what it's like to have a bad relationship where there's a lot of these issues going on. And so now it's kind of like I look back at that stuff and I kind of use it as like a building block for like, okay, I don't want those things to happen, so I shouldn't do that. Um, be comfortable in your relationship and whatnot. So now I think I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good with like maintaining my relationships with various people and stuff, which I guess
Mhm.
goes along with just being secure.
It definitely sounds like you came from a fearful avoidant attachment style. Because what most people don't understand is that fearful avoidant is like is the fearful part is the anxious part. So it's the anxious preoccupied. And a lot of people say they're actually more anxious than anxious preoccupied, but
Mm,
also just as avoidant. So people don't often see that much anxious portion, that is active, like on the
mm,
anxious preoccupied. And it's funny that you say that because I would have never guessed you as a fearful avoidant going to a secure attachment style. I know for me, when I was in my first relationship, I was
mm,
anxious, preoccupied. I was clingy. I needed their attention. I needed them all the time. I couldn't, people out there, I constantly need that validation. And then because they broke me so bad, I went and moved to a fearful, avoidant attachment style. And, here
Mm,
I am. And so, like you were saying, that you kind of try to not embody some of those parts of the attachment style. But for most people, they don't understand that attachment styles are very fluid. You have your foundational attachment style, but your attachment style is going to be different from to person to person. You might be secure with one person, like your parents, and maybe anxious with another one, like your relationship. And so attachment styles are really defined by the rules that we create to govern how we love people, and
mm,
how we attach to them. And so those rules can change, especially person to person, because everyone has a different rule in the way that they express love.
hmm. You know,
Yeah.
this perfectly segues into our next topic, I feel like, of love languages and how they relate to the various attachment styles.
Oh,
JP, take it away.
Okay,
it's a lot.
so we said love languages and how they attach to the various attachment styles.
Yep.
So I think when it comes to attachment styles, when it comes to love languages, people often think it's just the five. You have the acts of service, the words of affirmation, physical touch,
Mm,
quality time, and gift giving.
yep, yep.
But really, there's several different ways to express love. Personally, I believe vulnerability is a love language. I feel that when people are vulnerable with each other, that is them showing and expressing love. So when it comes to those love languages, even if you wanted to connect vulnerability to words of affirmation, for some
Mm,
people you have to be vulnerable to compliment someone because maybe you don't know how they're going to respond to your compliment.
True.
So when it comes to those love languages, there's definitely different aspects that connect them to how we attach. Because an anxious attachment style may exhibit a lot of words of affirmation. They may constantly tell you that they love you. They may constantly tell you that they care about you. While a
mhm,
dismissive avoidant might exhibit gift giving. Maybe they don't want to do anything emotional. Maybe they'll buy you a bag of chips or when you're hungry, or they'll do something that gifts, can do. And I think a lot of dismissive avoidance actually have do like a lot of quality time. Like they don't have any problem hanging out with you, or connecting with you on that level. Like they don't have to have those conversations just to chill with you. So I feel
mm,
like, and even secure, I feel like secure can embody a lot of these different love languages because, like I said, secure attachment styles are very adaptable. Um, but sometimes that does make them short sighted on what a person needs unless they are willing to communicate that. But I definitely
that's
think
fair.
all these different love languages can connect to any of the attachment styles depending on how that person chooses and wants to express that love.
So, do you think
Makes sense.
like that any person like at any point in their life can like have all the different types of love languages? Like it's not I guess like what you said before, like how it's fluid. Do you feel like any person could one of those languages or styles?
Yeah, I definitely think that anyone can be any of the attachment styles. And I think what people often find is their attachment style changes a lot in their romantic relationship because a lot of times in our romantic relationships, we put a lot of pressure on them.
Mm,
And so a lot of people find themselves being anxious in romantic relationships. And then if their anxious is not met with validation, they tend to become fearful avoidant. And even at times when it gets to an extreme, they can transfer all the way to dismissive avoidant and just not caring in the relationship anymore. And then of course you have some relationships they're just secure. They trust their partner, and that's what we ideally would like to have, but a lot of relationships are not really founded and stayed on trust. So I definitely think it's very possible to move through all these attachment styles and not just um like year to year, but even second to second, because I can be secure with my friend in this moment and this month, and then one thing that they do could completely set off my secure, and I'll be anxious, forever. Because like they say, once you break someone's trust, it's hard to get it back if you ever get it back. So imagine,
yeah.
you're secure with someone, you trust them, and everything's going good, and they do something to break your trust, and now it's always like you're anxious, you're always questioning whether to do it again. So it's definitely easy to to come from second to second with these attachment styles, because like I said, it is fluid. And even with the love languages, our love languages change from person to person too, because it really is circumstantial with all the things. Because what you might like doing now and expressing the way that you love now, you might not like doing with another person. I know in one of my relationships, the person really loved gift giving, and when my first relationship, I loved gift giving, but in my second relationship, I didn't want to gift give. So that was kind of a problem with them, because they wanted to receive a lot of gifts, but I just didn't want to express my love in that way. I more so expressed my love in words of affirmation and quality time. So yeah, I definitely think it's easy to change through those.
I
Yeah.
feel like I've seen like situations where like not just in like romantic relationships, but like friendships, where like one event that happens that kind of breaks the trust between them, like it kind of infects like all their interactions. Like the vibe is not the same. 'Cause they don't have like the trust they used to have.
Mhm,
I feel like that kind of just like applies to like any type of relationship, like family or friends.
mhm.
If something does happen, if something does happen to like that relationship, like we kind of takes a long time to recover. Not everyone is not everyone's like down to a path to recovery. I feel like sometimes like the fears and the doubts, insecurities of that, like this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's sad to see, but I mean that's kind of how those things go, you know. It's like I feel like there's an analogy slash metaphor for that, but basically, you know, once something's damaged, it cannot return back to how it was. It just has to evolve and become stronger. Well, not stronger, but like revolve into something different that still works well, or just it falls apart.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. Okay. So next topic. So JP, one of your most interesting takes. I mean, well, let me start up here. You have a lot of interesting takes. You say a lot of things that I'm like, oh wow, that's a real person who just said that, huh?
That is real.
But one of the ones where I was like, this is interesting. Maybe you should talk about that on the podcast. Is about vulnerability amongst people you're interacting with, or just amongst people, you know, in your circle or so on. And so I know you basically said that like as a society, effectively, like everyone should be more vulnerable with everyone. I felt like it'd be interesting to have you, you know, talk about it a little bit, have Christian give his take and whatnot.
Okay. You want to go now?
You want me to go? Yeah, you go.
Oh no,
It's your take.
oh, okay, okay, okay. So, vulnerability. I feel like it's very important to be vulnerable with people we connect with.
Hmm,
And so, because vulnerability is really the quickest way for trust and later comfortability. And comfortability tends to be what connects a community and what keeps it going. Comfortability is used in every aspect of every relationship. And I feel like it's the really the foundation of everything. You can't trust someone unless you're comfortable with trusting them. When you meet someone and you decide to trust them and you start trusting, that's because you're comfortable with allowing that vulnerability. And so it definitely is about being comfortable. And so that really just goes into even, something also we talked about, which is intimacy.
hmm.
And they say there's five types of intimacy. You have your physical, your sexual, your emotional, your intellectual, and which one? How many I name? Spiritual,
Spiritual,
experimental.
intellectual, experimental. Is that
Yes,
the fifth one?
experimental is said to
Uh,
be one. Experimental, spiritual, intellectual, physical, emotional. And so, and then I think I said sexual, but that's six, I think. But so I think experimental is the sexual one. But so when it comes to even like the types of intimacy, you often find vulnerability being under the emotional type of intimacy, because when we start to love people and we start to connect with them, that is us being vulnerable, because we're letting someone in, and we're also letting the ability to be hurt. And so I think that's what comes to, even with questioning people's intention, is how can they hurt us, and are they trying to hurt us? Is a question we tend to ask every time we meet someone, rather it is romantic or platonic. We're like, why does this person want to be my friend? Why does this person like me? What are they
Mhm.
trying to do? What are they trying? Are they trying to hurt me? What are their intentions? And so then it becomes about trust, and rather I'm comfortable in trusting you. So I definitely think that vulnerability is something that we need with people because we need to be comfortable with existing within our community, not just as an individual, but as someone who embodies community and is a part of a group of individuals.
Yeah, I get
You know,
that.
it sounds so much more normal when you're saying it now. I don't know.
Well,
Well, actually, no. Actually, no. Actually, let me reiterate. Because actually, when you said it the first time, I was like, honestly, doesn't sound that bad. Then you kept going, so we'll see how this develops in a second.
How it
But
develops.
just on an initial front, I actually think this is a great idea. Really, I think that as a society right now, we have very well. I think people use the internet because specifically a lot of our current societal issues kind of stem from the fact that everybody has access to the internet, everybody talks through the internet, and so because of that, they don't have to be vulnerable because they basically can disassociate from their online persona the moment things get a little too serious or they feel like it's getting a little bit too personal for them. And so it kind of creates a situation where people, because they don't really have a stake in their online personality, they then stay much more inflammatory slash aggressive things that in person you just wouldn't say. It's the thing that people say like on the internet where it's like, oh, let me see you in person. Of course, it's not going to be the same in person. In person, it just feels weird to call somebody a slur in person. It's not the same. You
well,
have to be a
that
kind of
depends who
crazy
you
person,
are. It's who you are.
huh? I
Uh,
mean, no, some people. It really does depend on the person you are. Like if that sort of thing doesn't really happen in real life that much. It happens, but not so much. Also, as a crazy example, but just roll with me here. Roll with me here. But in on the internet, it happens a lot more commonly because you just don't have to deal with the consequences of your actions. You don't need to be vulnerable. You don't have to ask, oh, will I be hurt for my actions? And so it kind of leads to a situation where because of this internet persona, it kind of leads into like your real life persona of kind of like viewing people from like in the same way you'd view like an internet person, where you kind of don't treat them like real people or you don't view them as real people if you don't feel like it. And so it just creates this huge hodgepodge of people who don't view each other as people. And so because we can't connect with each other as people, it just makes us way more irritable and not willing to like understand each other, to like come to like a mutual understanding. You kind of view each other as like talking points, kind of like with political issues, where like if you say you're a Republican or a Democrat, or you kind of say like, oh, I think this person has like makes a good point or whatever, but it's on the opposite end of someone else's viewpoint. Like you stop seeing them for like someone who has nuanced opinion, who could consider many things and have like deep, well thought out thoughts that can kind of fall in between two sides. And you kind of look at them as like, oh, you know, you're a Republican, you must be a raging racist, or you're a Democrat, you must. I don't know. Well, people have a lot. Republicans have a lot of takes about Democrats. I'll let them fill those in, but yeah, you get the idea.
No, I
Yeah.
get what you mean. I think that's also because like I think the way people move is that we kind of move in like kind of like a tribe or like
Mm,
if someone is saying something about your tribe, then I feel like naturally you're not going to like agree with it. Your I feel like your initial like instinct would just be to and like your own opinion. Um, I guess people that think the same way that you think. Because if you don't, then it's like, oh, I guess like lost my thought. But I feel like basically I just feel like people act like that on the internet because they don't want to understand the point because then they have to like actually think that maybe their opinion
mm.
what they're saying actually isn't right or it's not the right thing.
so are we talking about like preconceived notions that people have
Oh, I
with
think
each
Uh
so.
other?
I mean it
What
can be.
what are we?
I would say it's. I guess it's kind of like that, but I guess it is basically um it is a yeah, I guess preconceived notions would be the way to put it. Like I had something in my mind where I was like, oh, I'm gonna say something real intelligent right now, and then I lost it. So yeah, I guess preconceived notions is the best way to put it. Like it's a fear of it's a fear of believing that there is more to a topic than your personal viewpoint, or like there's a fear of being wrong, like Christian was saying, that manifests as basically being like, well, obviously, if I'm not wrong and you have to be wrong, then if you say anything that isn't literally what I said, then it has to just be like a representation of like all the worst qualities you could possibly be. Because there are people who exist like that. But then why? How come every person has to be like this extreme caricature of like their side, where they're like the most diabolical, least reasonable, most brain dead person who's spouting only nonsense, and not just be like I said, just someone who just has an opinion.
I think that that's such a good point. Just like thinking about one of a podcast that I listened to,
Mm-hmm.
and she was talking about how the most dangerous types of people are those who create narratives for themselves and narratives for other people. And so naming themselves like good or great or amazing, or saying I'm always right or I'm always this, and working in absolutes, that creates this idea that they can never be anything else other than what they've named themselves or named someone else. And so
Mm-hmm.
even just connecting it back to attachment styles, I think that becomes even a more of an issue because people often do create narratives. And I just want to speak for the underdog real quick. The anxious preoccupied attachment style gets a lot of hate because they're anxious. And some people, the fearful avoidance, sometimes don't understand. The
Mm-hmm.
secure sometimes don't understand, and dismissive avoidance sometimes don't understand, because
Mm-hmm.
the amount of worry that they have gets misunderstood. Because a lot of times when you have people like this who are always anxious, see, for a fearful avoidant, they're anxious, but they also become avoidant. And so sometimes people question whether that's secure or not because they can be alone. But anxious people, because they really don't, they only have one thing that they're going for, they're only anxious, a lot of times are misunderstood. And then you get these friends that are very anxious with you, they're very clingy, or you get in a relationship that's very clingy, and then you create a narrative for them as if they're always clingy or they always want something. And then you start to be like, it never means anything. And then you start
Mm-hmm.
invalidating them because it happens so often. And so, what I found in a lot of relationships is we start creating narratives for people who irritate us. And even another podcast that I saw was saying how the reason we get irritated with people is because we assume that their basic needs have been met. And that hit me so hard because I was like, you
Yes.
know, what do you mean that we assume that their basic needs have been met? And what they really was saying is, a lot of times we assume that what they need has been met. We assume
Mm-hmm.
that people don't need this, or because I am operating this way with my these other friends, that you should still be able to operate the same way with you. Like, my other friends don't need this much attention, so why do you? Why do we always have problems? My other friends don't have problems with me, so it must be you. You must be the common denominator. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of we create these narratives that because they're the common denominator, they must be the repeating problem, and that's just, it's not always as simple as that. So
I feel like
That's actually. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think what might help with that is just kind of like, I guess, like perspective or like empathy, like trying to put yourself in other the person's shoes. Because like I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely dealt with like trying to understand someone, but they're like wired different, so it's difficult. But I, for like myself, I try to understand like the best I can with like whoever I'm dealing with. But there might be a time where I'm like, I haven't experienced the way you have experienced your own life. So I just see things
Mm-hmm.
just naturally different on like a very like deep level. So I feel like there are just some
Yeah.
things you just have to like accept. Like going back to like having like an anxious attachment style or a person who has that style, I feel like just accepting that they have their own like fears and doubts and anxieties that you may not completely understand, but still trying
Yeah.
to like work with that, or like trying your best to like be like, okay, they feel this way. So let me try to just like understand that and make sure they feel like expressing their feelings.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain something or explain a feeling to someone that hasn't experienced the same thing that you have.
Feeling.
'Cause
Yeah.
it's like explaining like, oh, how do I breathe? Just kind of breathe. I feel like it's just kind of
Yeah.
like it's. I feel like it's
It's one of
something
the first
so
things you do. You kind of
yeah,
you
it's
don't
just
really think
natural.
about it.
So it's like explaining that
Yeah,
to someone. Never.
yeah, and I think that brings up even another problem is a lot of times we kind of attach characteristics to these attachment styles, and for that reason we start to say that this type of people only need to exhibit this one attachment, and we do it unconsciously. For instance, a lot of black men are very dismissive. They're dismissive avoidance. They tend to be uncomfortable with emotions. They tend to not be able to communicate them, and they tend to be independent because they might have had to grow up, alone and things like that. And so when people act outside of this attachment, when they actually start caring about feelings, or they actually start being anxious, we're like, oh wait, you're weird for that, or wait, that doesn't make sense. My other friends are fine. Why are you acting like this? And then they even might go as far as saying, why are you acting like a female, or why are you acting like this? Why do you care so much? And so I think that becomes the most dangerous part, because now we have created a narrative for who we're supposed to be and who we
Mm.
can't be. And so then you have these people who can't exist in that, and it creates even more problems and more division, because we start to get comfortable with one attachment. We start to be like, well, I'm comfortable right here. I don't need to be bothered with someone who's going to make it where I have to actually think. And
Mm.
that becomes a whole nother problem, because the whole point of attachments and understanding them is so that way you're able to figure out, what can I do for you? What can I do for the other person? But
Mm.
for someone who operates independently and autonomously, they may not want to do that, because they're like, why should I have to do that? Why can't they do it? Or why can't they just exist how I exist? And
Mm.
so I think that really just becomes the most dangerous part, when two people are not able to communicate and be okay with the differences, and figure out, where is the bridge? Where can we communicate, and how uncomfortable are we willing to be? Because I told Julian the other day that, like, some people are love being comfortable more than they love you, and people are not willing to get out of that comfort zone to help or to validate you, because they're so comfortable with where they are. They may love you, but they love being comfortable more.
That's a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. He has some bars sometimes. He has some bars. He spits a
Oh,
Spit.
I
little.
always
He
got
spits a
some
little occasionally.
bars.
I was gonna
He's getting out of hand now. He's getting out of hand.
I was gonna ask
Am I?
Oh yeah, you were gonna say, Christian?
what's your take on therapy? Because I know a lot of people don't
Is this
like.
psychology man? If what he thinks about therapy?
Well, I just want to stick on therapy because a lot of people like nowadays, like people I've talked to, and because of like their family and their family views, they don't really view therapy as like a viable way to get help, like mentally or emotionally or spiritually. Like, how do you feel about therapy to like help you, person?
I think a lot of people confuse what therapy actually is. People often think that therapy is to get advice, and so what happens is, when people have this idea that therapy is just for advice, they're like, I can give my own self advice. I have other people around me who give me advice. Why do I need to pay, or why do I need to go to someone who doesn't know me to give me advice about my situation? And that becomes the problem, because therapy is not about giving advice. Therapy is about giving you the tools necessary to break down the things that are going on in your mind, to be able to navigate your own emotions, navigate your stress. They're there to operate and give you the tools, and also to show you what you're missing. Because a lot of us, we can see ourselves in the mirror, but we can't see everything that everyone else is seeing, because we're focused on one image while other people are focused on different images. So a therapist is there to help you identify those traits. Therefore, you can do the work once you identify, which is why a lot of times people don't need therapy like long term. They just need it, to a point where they're able to identify things that they're doing that's hurting them, identify things that can help them, and actually be able to put those into work. So I think the first problem comes when people confuse what therapy is meant to do. And so honestly, I think everyone needs therapy because no matter how much introspection you sit there and do and understand and acknowledge yourself, there will be things that you miss and there will be things that you can't put together on your own without getting it from another person. And in this case, a professional who spends their life studying how to identify those things because your friends are not able to identify everything you do because your friends may not care about everything that you do. They may not have looked into everything that you do. But a
Mhm.
therapist is there to actually do that. That's their only job, and that's to help. Advice is really not what they're there to do, honestly. As you can see, they're usually there sitting writing notes about what you're saying rather than actually talking for themselves.
Hmm. Actually, that makes a lot of sense now I think about it. Like they're a vehicle for perspective where they kind of allow you to see yourself and the world in a more clear light, where usually most people have like one perspective or they see the world in like one color, maybe a couple colors if they're advanced, see the world in a couple colors. They're like, oh, kind of to see different perspectives here. But like you said, a psychologist's job or a therapist's job is to specifically show you like the full colored picture with the whole spectrum applied and kind of be like, hey, you might be messing up a little bit here. You might not have considered it, but this is something that is also important to being a healthy functioning human that you hadn't maybe considered or something you possibly may have neglected because you felt like you had it down packed or it didn't really matter or so on.
Mm. And definitely an objective lens.
Um, one of my favorite. There was like a quote from like a show. It's called Ted Lasso. It's a pretty good show. When the show, if I was like this soccer coach who comes, no, football coach who comes to UK to coach like a football team there, and like he eventually gets like a therapist. But like their very first session, it was going okay, and then he just got really pissed off because it was making him like really uncomfortable to like I guess be vulnerable, like it kind of expose himself, like open himself up. Um,
Mhm.
so then later he comes back and he's like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to blow up at you like that." And the therapist says like, she says some like motivational stuff, but the quote that really kind of stuck with me was like she said, "The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off." I was like, I've seen that like
Yeah.
with
Mm.
multiple people of like when you're told something that you don't want to hear, I feel like you're gonna be not gonna be happy about that. You're gonna be like angry about it. Or you're gonna not react
Mm.
happy way. You could
You're being denial. You're basically gonna want to buck against it, like, nah, it's not
no.
true, in a violent way, of course. But yeah, if you truly can grow, then you know that. Well, at least for me, a lot of times I hear a lot of things that I'm like, yeah, I really wish you didn't say that. And a lot of times, the reason why I come off very nonchalant about a lot of times when people give me like good advice is because I've kind of I know that like a big that I'm not a perfect person and that a lot of life is realizing that you're just gonna be spending all your life just being like, damn, I guess I can be better, can't I? And so a lot of times, like when my mother gives me advice, she's like, Julian, you could just do so much better, like
Oh
by a
wow.
lot. And I just look at her, I'm just like, I hate that you would say that, but I suppose you have a good point. I say
I
that
agree with
particular line. I
mom.
suppose you have a good point a lot.
I also
But
agree.
what was that, JP? Was that shade?
I agree with mom. Hey
I
mom.
I disagree with you. How about that? Um, but yeah, like
Doesn't
you
change.
know, mm, but yeah, even JP had to, he called me out a little bit on one or two occasions, and I was like, I had to do a sigh and just be like, oh well, maybe you might have a good point,
You're
you
accepting
know.
you're wrong. You're accepting you're wrong, right? That's
See,
what you're doing.
he does stuff like this, and I have to be
Somebody
like,
somebody got
I
to
need
keep
you
you in
listen,
check
to
down in DC.
the
verbalize it.
growth the
I need
growth
you to
is
verbalize
retracting.
it.
It's going backwards.
I need you to orally speak it. I verbalize it, please, for me, for the audience.
I
You're
am the
wrong.
proprietor of growth and becoming a better person. So of course, if someone gives me great advice, I will go ahead and follow that. Now, if the person wants to be a little smug about it, I'll have some choice words for them. But we
For the
love great
audience,
great
he
advice
is
around
saying
here.
that he's wrong in more words. Okay.
That's
Anyway,
Julian saying way of saying I'm wrong. Unaccepted.
maybe you know,
Mm,
maybe in one world or another, somewhere around there.
several worlds. This one too.
Uh,
But
anyway, let's. Well, oh, wait, does anyone else have anything they want to say on
well,
this
I just
topic?
thought of a quick like segue to not like a question on like on our topics, but like when I was thinking
Mm,
about is like what would you say is like one thing or like one thing you would say to like everyone in our like generation that will help them kind of with their own personal growth? Like one
mm.
thing they should like do. I guess if you could like narrow down to just one.
Mm. One sentence.
Well, just like
I don't know, well, I guess the
one
sentence
main
isn't
thing.
necessarily like a small monologue.
I would say that understanding without comprehension does not help you. And so sympathy, a lot of people believe that they're having empathy, but in fact they're having sympathy. They're like, "Oh, I feel bad for you. I feel bad for them. I'm hugging them because I feel bad for them. Oh, someone died, or oh, you're hurt." But that is not comprehension. That's under like this in a way understanding, but
Mm,
it's not comprehension. And so empathy is what you really need to be feeling like. To have empathy is something that we tend to not be able to physically do, but we can try. So we can. I feel your hurt. I'm crying with you because I feel your pain. Because you were hurting about something else, I am also hurting because it hurts you. And
mm,
so that comprehension is so important when you go throughout life and you're making a decision, because every day, no matter what you're doing, you need to be thinking about the other person. I know a lot, we in this life, we're always told that we need to be independent and we need to be self everything. But
mm,
a community that does not support each other or is supported by each other is not a community at all. It's just a group of individuals who say they are. And so to actually function as a community, we have to not only be willing to support someone else, but we also, just as important, need to be willing to be supported by someone else. I think people
mm,
often forget that. You have a lot of people who are givers, a lot of people who want to give, but if you're always giving and if everybody's a giver, who's actually receiving it? Because nobody wants to be supported. And then the same thing goes for those who just want to be supported. If you're always receiving something, you're always taking something, who is there to give it to you? So a
mm,
community that actually functions is one who supports, but also is okay with being supported. Because a lot of us, we do a lot for other people, but then when it comes to us, we're like, no, 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 no. But you are denying the community by not being supported by what you're giving to. What you're pouring into should also be pouring into you. And so I think the one thing I would want to say to people is we have to stop thinking in this individualistic way and start thinking in a communal way. And I think it will ultimately help us as we go about life and comprehending and having empathy for each other. It'll give us that ability to get that empathy that we so need for each other to comprehend how one is feeling, like the attachment styles.
mm,
You Unless you have that empathy for the person on why they may be anxious or why they may not feel validated, nothing's going to help you. The same thing, unless you have empathy for why somebody might need you to communicate in a specific love language. Like for instance, I like physical touch. I didn't get physical touch as a child. My mom didn't really hug me. So unless you understand and have empathy towards that, you might not be able to let your guard down to maybe you didn't like physical touch, but you're willing to have it with me because you understand me, you comprehend me, you have empathy for me. So I think it's very important that we get back to this communal idea that we've strayed away from and come back to it rather than trying to pick up this individual or independent idea.
mm.
A
That's
Gotcha.
little
actually
bit
really
more
good.
than monologue.
That is definitely more of a
That
monologue, but
was
honestly, pretty
so.
good. That was great. That was good stuff. That was good stuff.
Wait, so would you say like empathy is more like I guess putting yourself in their shoes while like sympathy is more like validating your feelings?
You know, it's funny that you say that. I'm gonna answer it, but I wanted to give this example. I People always just say, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and I always just disagree with it. I used to always disagree with it because I would say, well, first off, I used to wear a size 15 shoe until I lost weight. So I always would say, if you wear a size 6 shoe and you get into my shoes, you're not gonna feel the
Wait, you
same
said size
pain that I'm
15?
feeling with. Yeah, same size 15. So I
Oh,
always used to say like if your size 6 shoe get into my size 15, you're not gonna feel the same feeling that I feel when I'm in my 15 shoes, because not only are you not walking the same distance, but I'm flat footed. Nothing that you do by being in my shoes, even in my position, because you could I could be a manager and then we switch roles one day and you're a manager, you're not gonna fit the same description. So that I feel like more so is sympathy rather than empathy. Empathy is more so in depthly being able to think the same thoughts, experience the same experiences. And like that's why I said it's hard for us to ever get there, and we never really will get there. But to really feel that empathy is to really intrinsically understand and comprehend it, to really not only put ourselves into the shoes of that person, in a position of that person, but also to the experience and the feelings of that person. Like, how can we sit here and cry the same tears? How can we sit here and feel the same pain? What
Mm,
in me can be triggered that is triggered in you, so that way I can understand what you're going through? Maybe I have lost a loved one. How did I feel at that time? And how do you feel now? How can I bridge the gap to where I can have empathy for you and not just sympathy?
mm. So it's about. So I guess the better way to put it is that sympathy is a like Christian was saying, it's more like a resonance with their emotions. Like I wouldn't say you say, basically you validate their emotions where you're like, oh, I feel bad for you because that is a sad situation. That's more like a fact. Whereas his
Mm-hmm.
empathy is more like, I don't just I don't just know you're sad because that's a sad situation. It's like I'm in tune with your actual sadness. Like I don't just understand that emotion. I am that emotion with you, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
I am you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's where you get back to that more communal idea, because a community is people who can cry together. When we can sit here and cry at the same movie, when we can sit here and cry with the same tears. Like, that's why you have a group of people who go to funerals and they're all crying. Some of them don't even know each other. Some of them don't know who's dead in the casket. But they're sitting here crying together, because that is what empathy is. It's that communal type of bond that brings us together in a way that we can intrinsically feel what another person is feeling, rather than sympathy being, oh, I'm just gonna go and see this dead body while I eat my Big Mac in the parking lot. Like, that's a
That's so
difference, you know.
crazy. That's such a crazy thing to say.
I'm, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna send you, I feel bad for your loss, or sorry for your loss text message, but I'm not feeling what you're feeling. I'm still on the game right now. Like, so there is a difference, and I think people don't understand that some people just really need that empathy. We don't need you to be like, I'm sorry for your loss, or I understand your pain, or are you okay? We don't need that. We need you to feel what we feeling right now, because otherwise you can't understand what we understand it.
Hmm. That, that was so good. That was great. Love this, guys. Love this. Well, I don't have a good segue, so we're just gonna hop into the last
well,
question.
I have a good
Oh,
segue. I have a good segue
go
for
for
the
it.
next question. Um, we're just talking about like being empathetic and like sympathetic with people. So,
Mm.
damn, I don't got a good segue. I don't got it.
Yeah, I thought you were on a roll. I was just about to say land, land, land.
See, like
Okay,
I
well,
was about to,
basically,
yeah. No, go ahead, go ahead.
well, yeah,
It's
I
too late
felt like
now.
you were gonna go for something like along the lines of, well, we're talking about being empathetic and about the idea of
Mhm.
like feeling what they feel, or like being who they are in that moment when they're feeling
Mhm.
whatever they're feeling at that time. Um,
Yeah.
that requires it is a very it is a level of closeness that is, like you said, it's something that is like it's perfected over the course of your entire lifetime. Like you're just never gonna truly get it at any given
Mhm.
point in your life. Um, so with that being said, what does it mean to be close with someone in general, even beyond putting, not necessarily putting aside, but like considering empathy and sympathy and everything that we've already discussed at this point? What does it mean to be close with someone, whether it be friendship, relationship, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, etc., family member?
Um, I definitely think that my idea of closeness has changed over time.
Hmm.
I used to believe that closeness was having as little as possible boundaries with one another. I used to think that the closer you got, the less boundaries the person would have with you. But then I realized that that's not what was happening. The closer you got was the more aware of the boundaries that person has. And so that where you never really cross those boundaries because you are now aware of them, you know? So it's not that you are not having as many boundaries. It's that now you're subconsciously aware of them, so you never cross them. So you never feel like there's a distance. You never feel like there is a boundary because you always know the opposite direction to go. You always know where to go. And so when it comes to closeness, I think a lot of people kind of mix up the idea of bonds and closeness because bonds can help you become close because bonds are those experiences, those memories, those feelings that get us to being comfortable, which fosters closeness. And so a lot of people will be like, well, I'm still close to my best friend that I haven't talked to in 10 years. No, no, no. I don't believe that you're close with them still. I believe that you still experience the same bonds. You still have the same bonds, but closeness is about comfortability. Who you are 10 years later might not be who you were 10 years ago. And so when you come and you interact, yeah, you have those same experiences, you have those same things that you feel like are making you close, but there's going to be something that you're not necessarily comfortable saying or experiencing or feeling with them anymore. And so that becomes what the idea of what closeness actually is, and it's that comfortability. And we often lose comfortability from moment to moment because one thing, like I said, that can make us anxious can also make us uncomfortable. Something that you might have said can trigger something in us, and we're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on. I am no longer comfortable, doing this with you because this comment that you just made or something like that. So I really believe that closeness is that comfortability. And a lot of people really believe that it's those bonds that we make that over time, because a lot of people say that you have to take a whole bunch of time to be close. But no, that's all those bonds that are helping you foster closeness. But you don't need 10 years to be really close or the closest. Because honestly, people experience that same closeness in a week of not even knowing that much about each other. But in that same week, they don't have to have as many bonds to be as comfortable. Because some people, like for instance, you have fraternities, you have military, all those things. They spend a short time, rather it was 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. They experienced a short time of bonds with one another, and they became comfortable, and they became the closest they could possibly be. Rather than those people who are outside of boot camp or outside of basic training or outside of the process in the fraternity, they're not as close with them anymore. I had a friend here at Howard. He joined a fraternity. He was really close with us, but during his process, he got really close with them. So it's like closeness is about comfortability, and comfortability can be fostered through bonds, but it also can just be fostered through that one bond. It doesn't have to be a plural amount of bonds, and it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It could really just be a moment thing.
So
See, that's an
bonds.
interesting way to put it.
You go ahead,
Oh,
Julian.
oh, okay, yeah, because I never actually considered the idea of bonds and closest being different. But now you bring it up, it actually probably does. It actually does make sense that like having a lot of experiences with somebody will develop the bonds necessary. I guess you could think of bonds as kind of like amplifiers or catalysts where they can hightail the trail to being very close with somebody. And those catalysts don't have to necessarily go away, especially over time. You guys always had that connection, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that you guys are always as close as you were when those bonds were initially formed, or as you guys were building your closeness after those bonds were formed over time. Because I guess, closeness would probably involve like knowing somebody, knowing like their intimate details, like, who are they at their core, how they feel day by day, what are their insecurities, who they like, who don't they like, why don't they like them, and so on and so forth. And obviously, people change over time. And so to maintain that closeness, it would require that you guys are like in close proximity, to use the word again. It requires that you guys are in close proximity and like continuing to like, as they're changing, you're changing with them and finding out about them as you guys go forward. So if separate for a long time, the closest has to be less, even though your bond and the potential to reach that same high level of closeness can't stay the same.
Yeah, and I think a good example for people out in the audience to understand is like a trauma bond. A lot of
Mm,
people don't understand why, you have this trauma bond and you get so close, or this idea of what you think is closeness. And then at the end of it, when the trauma is no longer traumaing and or whatever, and you're not close and you're like, oh, we were never close. Or like during during COVID, when everybody had COVID friends or anything, and they
mm,
created these trauma bonds, and then they get out of it and they're like, oh, we weren't really close. We weren't. But see, when you have a trauma bond, what is trauma? It's this idea of being vulnerable, and when you connect on such a vulnerable level, you form this comfortability in one aspect of your life, and that becomes the experience that fosters that bond, and that bond fosters what we believe is closeness, this fake facade of what is closeness, because we think we're close to the person because we've experienced this idea of vulnerability in one aspect. And so
mm,
then that becomes the deciding factor. Like, if you've only experienced this one idea in one aspect, how are you really truly experiencing them in other aspects that would make you comfortable? And so I think, even I keep bringing up different podcasts, but that same podcast that I was talking about the narrative,
Podcast.
she also said that a lot of people get into these friendships and these relationships with the idea of just wanting to be deep with them. Let's know your trauma, let's know your personal everything. And they want
mm,
these deep connections, but when reality hits it, their friendship ends, because instead of being deep, they really need to be focused on being wide, and see that
mm.
wide
I think we talked about that
connection.
before. Yeah,
Yeah,
continue, continue.
we did. But in that wide connection is those little things, those little pet peeves, or those little things we didn't know, or those little comments that trigger them. It's that experiencing out through life in different situations. For instance, a lot of we go to Howard together, so a
Mm,
lot of what we experience is going to be deep because it's only going to be at Howard. So what you experience at home and outside of that, I won't know. So I don't know how to be close to you on that wide level, to where when we get
mhm,
out of college, how are we going to function? Because we've only functioned in one place. So how are we going to function outside of this? And so I think that's one of the most important things too, is having those wide connections, and how that contributes to comfortability and closeness. Because if I know Julian in one way, and I know you, Julian doesn't like this, but what is he like at home? Like, if I was to go to dinner with him and his family, what would he want me to say there versus in school? It might be two different things. And that really creates the idea of what is comfortability and what is closeness.
See that? I feel like I've seen that like different levels in my life with people I know. It's like, for instance, like with you, Julian, like we had like a
Mm,
lot of experiences in high school because I saw you the most there. But then
mhm.
once we went to college, I only saw you like a handful of times of the year. I
Yeah.
still felt pretty close to you when it came to like just talking to you in general, or like asking you for
Mhm.
advice or just having fun, just playing games, whatever.
Yeah.
But then with other people, it was kind of like the opposite. Where like now that we didn't have like that place that we interacted in, we're not as close as we used to be. So I just feel like I don't know. I feel like it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting because seen that with other people. I've especially seen it with like relationships because question I've always like kind of thought about myself or like seen like on the internet is how long not how long should you but at what time should you get into a relationship? I don't like want like time wise like months, years. I've seen like very different answers to that question because I feel like it's not really something you can answer and just be like, okay, for every relationship, you guys need like at least 3 months and then you guys can get
Mhm,
into a relationship.
mhm,
I feel like with everyone, it's something different because everyone is they just operate differently. Like the way your potential partner acts, you guys might need more time to like develop that closeness. But then like you were saying about like people being close with like weeks, some people don't need like months, some people a couple weeks or maybe even less.
mhm.
I just thought that was interesting because that's not really something you. There's not like an exact answer for it. Very broad.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I would also say, like, even in fostering that comfortability, and rather it's in a day or week or year, whatever, I think it also is important that in that closeness, when you're close and you're comfortable, and you might have those deep relationships, and you might experience some wide forms of that as well, because maybe you're going situation to situation. I think it's also important, like you mentioned, like maybe what's the time frame of getting a relationship. I always say that you should have created a foundation of friendship first, and a lot of
Mhm.
times, true friendship, is not submitted until um about 3 months. It's called the 90-day period, the 90-day effect. And then essentially in those 90 days you figure out who a person truly is, because they say
Mhm.
no one can really hide themselves for more than 90 days. They can't hide who they are for more than 90 days. So that you start experiencing those certain things that maybe like, oh, maybe we have different moral values here because you just did that. You know, maybe you're not as nice as you were, because now you can't get what you want. Or a lot of people like, oh, this person was nice to me to get sex, or they were nice to me to do this. But how long does that last? How long can they hold out for that? And a lot of times we see this 90-day effect where people start to show who they are, or even if they weren't hiding it, you start to be revealed more of like who a person is. Because after that first thing where you're looking at them as who you think they are, in those
Mhm.
90 days you start to actually know who they actually are, because now it's not, now you're kind of dissecting the narrative you've created for them. They start acting outside the narrative you created them when you first met them, because when you first met them, then you already create your narrative and you already create your list of who they are. And in those 90 days, they constantly will show you if they fit in that narrative or do they fit outside of it. You have to keep editing, oh, who is this person? Who is this person? Until it just completely shatters. And you're like, who you are now, 90 days later, is not at all who I thought you were when I first met you. And so I
Mhm.
think that is a very important idea as well.
Yeah, I I I pretty much agree with both of you. I feel like it real when well thinking specifically as like as relationships, but I guess this really applies to like friendships as well, where
Mhm.
meeting like I guess that 3 month period, especially if you guys are like actively interacting a lot, it can be very eye opening because what someone portrays themselves as when you first meet them, a lot of times, well, at least I know for myself, my portrayal of myself when people first meet me, for most people, is very diametrically opposed to how I am like in totality. Like when I'm comfortable with them, I'm like, oh, you're a cool person. Like, and I feel like we're gonna continue to talk on a regular basis. Let me start acting like how I usually am. And like I can usually tell, I kind of set like a stress tester of like how how close am I with this person, or how close do they like what they think I am, and how they how they view me. There we go. How they view me determines how close we are, because I've kind of noticed that like when I'm first meeting people, especially if I'm like, in a very casual setting and like we're just speaking randomly, usually I would assume, well, not assume, but like it's pretty much stood the test that people who don't really know me that well tend to think that I don't talk a lot. I don't really have that many opinions. I kind of just to myself a lot. I don't really have too much to say. I'm kind of just a nice guy. I'm
Uh,
just very chill.
uh,
People who are very I'm very comfortable with are pretty aware that like I talk a lot and I'm fairly opinionated. I'm loud. I just do a lot. I be saying a lot of very unhinged things, doing a lot of crazy stuff. I'm very open to getting into hijinks and so on and so forth. And so usually when someone says like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, it's just Julian. He's a really nice guy. He just kind of sits off, well, not in the corner. I mean, that's not a little crazy, but he's just off to the side. He's just hanging out." And I usually tend to tell like, oh, someone who really knows me really well. Usually, they'll probably still describe me as like nice and whatever, especially if they're like saying to somebody who probably doesn't know me that well, but that person is looking to figure out like who am I. They'll probably mention these things, but they'll also maybe mention like, oh yeah, he does talk a lot, or he says he does some stuff. Like they may not immediately say what I do, but they'll allude to the fact that like, oh, what it looks like he is on first meeting is not really who he is in totality. And getting to know me in my totality is like, I guess you could say this is like a form of me, my form of a love language of like, oh, if you understand my personality, then that is me showing like, oh yeah, we're close, we're like this, and so on. But of course, this doesn't apply to JP because our first meeting was it was something.
Ah,
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
it was, it was.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
definitely
know,
gonna
it's
go on.
I don't know you.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say I was just gonna say based on like me knowing you for a lot of years, I could
Mm.
definitely attest to that. Also that like especially the past, I guess from like high school till now, I've definitely seen like subtle changes in you like over time. Like things you like things not that you weren't cool with, but things that you were kind of like about. You start doing more. I'm like, oh, I see the growth. You know,
Huh. I have no idea what he's talking about, but okay, I guess I'm growing.
getting there.
Mm.
Were you gonna say JP?
Oh, I was just gonna say I really agree with kind of some of the. Well, I agree with what Julian was saying, and what I found was that closeness is really that trust that you get from allowing someone to advocate for you. And it's like trusting someone with who you are is such a fundamental part to who we are as people. Because a lot of us hate being perceived. And the fact that we allow people to perceive us and understand us is like the most genuine part of love. Um, so what I found was I could really tell who I was close to by who I felt and trusted could advocate for me the best, and who I felt like knew me the best to advocate for that. And so what you'll find is when you have these people who agree with you, or you have these people that are friends with you, and they know who you are, so they know what you meant, and they're able to say what you meant. It's like the biggest idea of like closeness, because a lot of times like we're close to our parents, but we also know our parents can advocate for us if need be. The same thing with our siblings. A lot of times when we get close to people is because we trust them with who we are, and a lot of times when we're not close to people and we're disconnected is because we don't trust them with who we are as people. We don't trust them to advocate for who we are intrinsically.
Hmm.
I feel
I've
that.
never really considered that, but I guess that's a good point.
I feel like
Because only. Oh, do you want to go first?
nah, I haven't thought it out completely. Like,
Okay, I was gonna say because only someone who like understands you on like a very deep level can truly like speak your ideals without you even being there, or like without you having to like tell them first. Like I feel like only people who like I've basically shared my deeper, most inner thoughts with could be like, for example, they could buy a gift for me without like needing me to be there. And me personally, I am like a horrible person to buy gifts for because I'd never want anything ever at all. Anything I ever want, I usually tell myself if I can't immediately get it, I usually tell myself I don't want it. And so it turns into when people ask me like, "Oh, it's Christmas. What do you want for Christmas?" I'm like, "Oh, want? I don't know,
So
money,
light
I guess."
skin.
That's that was crazy. Anyway, he's a colorist. I'm just gonna throw it out there. I just gotta, yeah,
Colorist.
yeah. He got
How
some
can I
kind of.
be colorist?
He had a little. He has beef.
I'm all shades.
He has beef with light skinned people. Not only that,
what's
but
the beef?
ask him whether he's light skinned or not. Ask him.
Are you light skinned?
Of course not. Do you see how brown my skin is?
Well, that's what I saw. But like, okay, so what's the
Yeah,
beef with the?
I'm brown. Am I not?
Yeah,
Am
You
I
see what I'm
not
saying?
brown?
yeah.
Do you
No, you
see
are.
how
And
Julian
we're all
Julian is
brown.
light?
All black people are brown.
No, Julian.
No, no, they're not, man. They're not.
You're a little tan. You're a little. That's not brown. That's sand. That's
Putting that
Sand is skin.
aside, putting aside though, all right, we're gonna put the sand comment aside. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Are you seeing what I'm saying? I
No,
just
no,
saying.
no. I can
I had
did
to
understand
I
throw
because
that in
skin
there
like
bag
since it was,
test?
since it was brought up. I just had to throw it in there. You know.
I mean like literally like
Wait, who was speaking? Were you talking?
Um,
Who was making who was talking before we got derailed? Was it me?
it was you, and
yeah,
then
it
I
was
was gonna
you.
say something.
Damn, I don't remember what I was saying at all. I have no clue. And who remembers?
Well,
Anybody?
you were talking about the closeness and why you wouldn't have certain people give gifts for you and things like
Oh
that.
yes, 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 yes. Yeah. Well, for me, I feel like gift giving is another. Well, not gift. Someone who can give me a gift. At least for people who don't want a lot of things and like tend not to really particularly want gifts that often,
Hmm.
or like have a hard time like articulating what they want as a gift. Someone
Hmm.
being able to buy you a gift and specifically get you something that like you truly want and appreciate is someone who knows you very intimately
Mhm.
because getting someone the correct gift, it's hard. Like it's easy to like be like, oh, you're a guy, so I don't know. Here's a belt. Here's some cologne. That's easy. Or like if you're a girl, you're like, oh, body wash. Like that's light work. All right.
Body wash? Sorry.
No, not because they're dirty or something, but like, oh, smell good items or like a purse, like easy stuff.
A
That's not even
purse.
about them. That's just about like, oh yeah, you're a girl or you're a guy. Like I can
Julian,
hit you
don't
with
ever give me a gift.
what? I'm not giving. That's not gifts I'm giving. Jeez, relax. My
Gifts
point
are
that I was
so
getting to
surface
before I was
level.
almost attacked. All right. The point I
Oh,
was getting to was that to get someone like a truly good gift is to know who they are on its like most deepest levels, understanding them, being around them a lot, and then being able to be like, oh, I know they brought this up like a month or two ago and they were kind of really interested in it, but they couldn't buy it at the time. Or I know what things interest them or things they're that they find exciting to receive or so on and so forth, and being able to like provide that thing without any of their input. Like you don't need to ask them what gift they want. Like you kind of know you kind of, I guess this kind of relates to empathy where like I can put myself in, I can put see through their eyes and see what would light up my face, what light up their face through my own eyes, and then purchase that thing to give to them. That's like the highest level of gift giving, which is hard to do for most people because you don't know everybody that well to be able to just pick something out like that consistently.
yeah.
True.
Hmm? You were gonna
Nice.
say something, JP? Oh, well, no, no. Whoever wants to go first.
You go first,
No, you won't be losing your train of thought.
Jake. Yeah. I think from like my personal experience, like giving gifts, I've always tried to I just ask the person like what usually like after some time, I'll just know you all enough that I'm like he or she or they wouldn't want that, but they would definitely like this. Sometimes you'll just see that one thing and like one and it'd be working. Other
Mm,
people, depending on like how much I know them or how close I am with them, harder like you said.
No,
So
I kind of I Julian kind of made me remember like how because Julian, I made that 5 tiers of friendship thing. Remember that?
yes. That's friendship. Yep. I remember that.
And just like speaking to like who we trust with with ourselves, and then even when you were like you found yourself being close to certain people in a certain atmosphere, and then when you got out of that, you were no longer close. And
Mm,
in my 5 tiers, I say, one is acquaintance, and acquaintance being, people we acknowledge, we respect them enough to acknowledge them. We're gonna speak to them, might even dap them up. And then you have associate, which is the second tier, and people who are gonna often are confused with friends because you can get really close to an associate, but it might just be at work. You might just be best buds at work, just like your work best friend or your
yeah,
high school best friend. Y'all
mm,
never function outside of that situation or that idea, or you never would have connected with one another intentionally if you weren't in that same classroom. And when you get out of those spaces, you might not be friends. And so it becomes where the associate transitions to the friend, which is the third tier. And those, people that you're starting to create bonds with. And then as you get to the fourth tier, your close friend, best friend, and those that you're starting to be comfortable with and expressing certain love languages with. And then even to the fifth tier, which is the last and final tier, to like where people you're gonna start calling your family or your sibling and treating them as family. And those are the people that you tend to trust with yourself, a lot. You trust them to be vulnerable with. You trust them to advocate for yourself. Um, you start to exhibit a lot of the love languages with and exhibit a lot of vulnerability with. And so I just found it interesting that y'all were kind of hitting on all those tiers, as y'all express how y'all get close to people.
yeah. I pretty much see it the exact same way. The tier.
oh, look at this. That's so
Yeah.
nice. It's a great.
All right. Well, I feel like we kind of touched on all the things we want to talk about. Do we have any like closing thoughts, final thoughts on the
Um,
conversation?
Um, I feel like this was, it was a great conversation. I didn't get JP to say any. Well, actually, no, I did get him to talk about his colorism, but I didn't get to him
Wait,
say
go on.
like,
Wait,
all
real
the full
quick.
breadth of things that I was like, oh yeah, I need this guy to say this on a public platform so that then everybody can appreciate everything that I'm like, dang, this he's something. He's quite unique. Yep.
Wait, real
But
I am
quick.
unique,
Going back.
but
Well,
I'm not colorist.
debatable.
you were saying
But
something about
overall, I think it's a great podcast. We had a great time.
like light skin beef.
Oh, him?
Light
Oh yeah,
skin.
he has a little bit of beef with light skins.
Want to elaborate
Do
or?
I?
He's resisting the urge to talk about it. He's resisting.
I'm not resisting any urge. What beef do I have with light skins?
You know, hey, it's been a long podcast. I want to, this could go on for another hour. I feel like so. I'm gonna let it slide this time. I'm sure if JP decides to grace the podcast with another visit, I'll definitely bring this up. I'll remember this.
You remember this?
I'll remember this. Yes.
Personally, like I
Uh-huh.
said, I'm just gonna tell everybody to follow me on all platforms.
Okay. Oh yeah, I forgot you
TikTok,
haven't do that. Mm.
Instagram,
Mhm.
president.emp. So y'all go hit the follow button.
Oh yeah, sure. Actually, well, we'll probably put you in the description.
Yeah.
That's just a thing we do. So send your handles over to me. I'll put them in the description. People follow
You
all
you
that stuff.
should know them, Julian. It's just president.emp. I am the EMP and the president.
Unique guy, that one. Anyway, Christian, what are your closing thoughts?
um, people are very complex. It's like biggest thing I've learned in my life. A lot of complexities when it comes to like psychology, how we operate as people,
Mhm.
and understanding that it takes a lot of time and effort. Definitely for
Definitely,
myself, I'm
definitely.
still figuring that out. So, whoever is watching this, definitely take some time to, I guess, contemplate yourself and your own relationships to see how. Not even if there's a problem, just like out of just general curiosity, just to like, I guess, wonder like, why do I act this way?
So on and so forth. Yeah, it might make things better for you. Understanding is the first step to changing.
Knowing the difference in how you interact with one person to another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, good podcast. All right, guys. Peace.
Peace.